Apocalypse plus zombies plus abilities plus beasts plus divine pets plus space plus killing resolutely plus storing supplies. The end of the world has arrived, and Gu Xia was killed by his girlfriend and neighbors together. Before his death, his counterattack made him aware of his power, but in the end, he still lost too much blood and was unable to resist. In the next moment, he was reborn 3 days before the end of the world, bringing with him the ability to devour all energy in the previous life. So the first thing he did after being reborn was Ling Chi's girlfriend, cutting off his neighbor's limbs. Absorb energy, evolve physique. Since killing can consume energy, he will slaughter all the creatures that block him. Find a sister who has relied on each other since childhood. In this life, he wants to protect his sister well. Gu Xia. Zombies. Human beings. Animals. And the nuclear wastewater from the little cherry blossom country, the mutated creatures in the sea, I devour them all. Chapter 1. Kills you. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Dong, dong, dong. I am Zhang Guodong, the captain of the 5th Brigade of Y City Police Station. Please open the door. Gu Xia extinguished the cigarette in her mouth with 2 fingers and stood up from the sofa. He threw the knife in his hand onto the table, drew a tissue, and slowly wiped the bloodstains on his hands. Later, he walked slowly towards the direction of the door. The door opened, and Gu Xia said with a faint smile on her lips, "Captain Zhang, please." He turned sideways and made a "please" gesture. Gu Xia's clothes were stained with shocking blood, but her words and posture were like an ordinary person. Before Zhang Guodong could react to him, his vision suddenly widened. Everything inside the house is clearly visible. Zhang Guodong's pupils suddenly shrank, and a thin layer of sweat broke out on his back. He suddenly took out a gun from his waist and aimed it at Gu Xia, shouting sternly, "Squat down, hold your head with both hands." Gu Xia pulled her lips and smiled, lazily raising her hand, hugging her head, and squatting down with great cooperation. The police car was steadily driving in the direction of the police station. In the car radio channel, it is playing that Sakura country is preparing for the 5th nuclear wastewater discharge recently. Gu Xia sat calmly in the back of the police car, handcuffed with cold hands. He tilted his head slightly, his thumb clicking on the knuckles of his fingers, and looked frantically at the bustling streets receding outside the window. TSK, this peaceful scene is really nostalgic. Unfortunately, it no longer exists after 3 days. In the interrogation room, Gu Xia sat calmly on the cold chair, her hands handcuffed to a stainless steel table. Gu Xia, a local, holds the record for 3 consecutive championships in martial arts Sanda. Who are the 2 deceased in the room? Zhang Guodong sat directly opposite Gu Xia, closing the information in his hand and staring up at him. Gu Xia played with the handcuffs shining with cold light, without lifting her head, and answered truthfully with a playful expression on her face. The woman is my girlfriend Pan Lianyun, and the man is my neighbor. Zhang Guodong frowned and continued to ask, the motive for the murder. Gu Xia stopped her movements and lifted her eyelids to look at Zhang Guodong, her tone casual. Captain Zhang, what would you do if your wife gets involved with your neighbor? Sexual assault is a common occurrence in police stations. Upon hearing this, Zhang Guodong grabbed a photo of the young police officer next door's hand and forcefully threw it onto the table, glaring angrily. Even if they turn against you, they will be punished by law. Do you need to be dismembered and executed by Ling Chi? In the photo on the table, the men and women were in a tragic state of death, with their limbs cut off, their tendons pulled out, and their skin peeled off. There is not a complete part of the corpse, and the skin is cut off piece by piece, just like Dao Shao noodles. He glanced at the photo on the desktop and suddenly smiled, revealing a wild pleasure in his smile. He is just treating others in their own way. If he doesn't kill these 2 people, in a few days, the person lying on the table will be him. He just started ahead of time. Besides, the blue star of the previous life was an unknown virus caused by the impact of meteorites. 90% of the world's population has become bloodthirsty and carnivorous zombies. And 1% of those who carry it down will become awakened, awakening various abilities. Although Gu Xia was fortunate enough to become an awakener, he awakened the most useless ability, devouring it. After awakening, he felt endless hunger every day. Each meal must accommodate the appetite of 5 adults in order to barely satisfy hunger. If it weren't for my sister who works at the satellite station calling Gu Xia in advance and asking him to stock up on some food. The food at home cannot last for 10 days. After running out of food, Gu Xia, who lived with Pan Lianyan, was forced to go out and beg for food from her neighbors. But the result was calculated by the dog man and woman. At the last moment of his life, he suddenly counterattacked and picked up the fruit knife on the table, stabbing Pan Lianyan to death. Unexpectedly, it was discovered that his devouring ability, after killing someone, could enhance himself and better absorb the other person's memory. But in the end, due to excessive bleeding, there was no resistance at all. Fortunately, he was reborn 3 days before the beginning of the apocalypse. And what rebirth brings is also the hunger-filled devouring ability. Answer the question. Zhang Guodong looked at Gu Xia's increasingly gloomy smile and felt even more uneasy, sternly scolding. Gu Xia's thoughts were pulled back, and he slowly suppressed the smile on his face, fearlessly saying, "Zhang team, kill everyone. Tell me the law. Why don't you take me to jail earlier?" Gu Xia had a bad and arrogant attitude, with no trace of fear in her eyes. Killing someone is as common as killing a chicken in his mouth. Such people are the most terrifying. Zhang Guodong didn't argue with Gu Xia anymore. After asking some more questions, he had someone pull him down. During the interrogation, Gu Xia confessed to the murder without hesitation. Due to the conclusive evidence, Gu Xia was also convicted of intentional homicide by the court, sentenced to death, and imprisoned in a prison on the outskirts of Y City for execution. Inside the prison, Gu Xia, dressed in prison uniform and handcuffed with iron chains, was walking in the hallway with a blanket in hand, sandwiched between 5 prison guards. "Brothers, here comes another delicate and tender little girl. Come here and let me have a look. Look at this mouth, this butt, tsk, I want to be the first one later, don't stop me." Gu Xia lowered her head, with a faint smile on her lips, walking leisurely. Not paying any attention to the obscene words spreading from other cells. A moment later, the prison guards pushed Gu Xia into a cell. There is a double room in the cell, and there is also a fellow inmate. He walked to the empty bed and put down his pillow and bedding. Then he lay down, holding his head in both hands and closing his eyes, feeling the amplification brought by the 3 white lines inside his body. He felt that at this moment, whether it was strength, speed, or facial recognition, it was constantly increasing. But complete absorption still requires some time. The appearance of the white line also confirms that his ability can indeed consume energy and convert it into his own use. At the same time, the hunger brought by this ability at all times, after absorbing the white line, surprisingly had a hint of satisfaction. "Attention everyone, please walk to the prison door immediately." Suddenly, a broadcast came from outside the cell. Not long after, several prison guards came to Gu Xia's cell. Gu Xia slowly opened her eyes and looked at the prison guard outside the iron gate. She walked to the door calmly and reached out her hand. When Gu Xia locked his hands back on the iron chains and was taken to the playground. The prisoners on the playground stopped their activities and looked sideways at Gu Xia. Someone even blew a whistle at Gu Xia. At the same time, the broadcast rang again. "Stand in a military posture for an hour, now it's starting." Gu Xia's mouth slightly raised as he looked towards the tallest building outside the wall. A few big characters are reflected in his pupils, Sui Liang Granary. Chapter 2. The Beginning of the Apocalypse. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. On the playground. 1, 2, 1. 1, 2, 1. After standing in a military posture for an hour, Gu Xia was running around the playground with other prisoners. At this moment, the sound of the end of the activity came from the broadcast. After running 20 laps, there will be half an hour of free time to move around. Gu Xia stopped and took a deep breath without changing her expression, then lowered her head and clenched her fist. It seems that endurance has also increased, and after 20 laps, I didn't even sweat. At this moment, the remnants of Gu Xia's light swept over 4 tattooed inch heads walking over. He showed an unknown smile at the corner of his mouth, but soon it was hidden by him. In the blink of an eye, 4 people surrounded Gu Xia and looked up and down at him for a while with ill intentions. One of the 2 bearded inch-headed eyes exuded a primitive desire. Dog brother, this kid has delicate skin and tender flesh, he needs to taste it well. He turned his head to look at an inch with the word Sheng tattooed on his neck. The inch head, known as Dog Brother, slowly walked out and lifted Gu Xia's chin with 2 fingers. Little girl, come to my cell after washing up later and let the young master treat you well. Don't think about resisting, otherwise you will die very miserably. After speaking, I still remember kissing Gu Xia. Gu Xia's eyes narrowed slightly, and his gaze became playful. His thumb pressed against the knuckles of his finger with a clicking sound. Tisk, do you know where the human body is most prone to death? Dog Brother's expression froze for a moment, waiting for him to react. Gu Xia suddenly hugged Gouch's head and punched him on the temple. Gu Xia, who had strengthened his strength, dealt a blow that directly shattered Gouch's brain. The Dog Brother who was just shouting collapsed on the ground and twitched a few times, completely losing his breath. Gu Xia suddenly took action, causing the other 3 to retreat in fear. Do you have time to run? Gu Xia showed a crazy smile and suddenly exerted force under her feet, approaching the 3 people in an instant. Then only the sound of bang 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 was heard, and the 3 people who had not yet had time to shout for help. He was twisted by Gu Xia and lay on the ground, looking at him in terror. At this moment, Gu Xia was like a demon from hell, slowly walking towards the 2 bearded man. Approaching the man with an inch head, he squatted down and grabbed his neck with one hand. He smiled and said, in the next life, don't cut your inch head. After speaking, with a click, he broke the man's neck. At this moment, a piercing alarm sounded on the radio. A large number of prison guards holding weapons appeared at the entrance of the playground. Get down, all down, hold your heads in both hands. Gu Xia glanced at the position at the door and knew that the other 2 could not be killed today, so she had to give up first. At the same time, 2 white lines emerged from the body and went straight into Gu Xia's body. This time he didn't resist, instead he squinted slightly and enjoyed the feeling of his body being improved. Then he followed the instructions of the prison guards and lay on the ground, ending the battle of the unilateral massacre. Several prison guards quickly ran over and detained Gu Xia. Due to a major brawl that resulted in 2 deaths and 2 injuries, Gu Xia was thrown directly into the confinement room. In front of the iron door of the confinement room. Go into the wall and think about you, Gu Xia was forcefully pushed in by a prison guard. The prison guard slammed the iron door tightly and turned around to leave. Gu Xia frowned slightly, glanced back at the direction where the prison guard had left, and then ignored it. Entering the confinement room, he scanned the less than 5 square meter room. Except for the palm-sized window above, there are only 4 walls left in this confinement room. Then he found a corner with his back against the wall and sat down. Now in his body, he possesses the energy brought by 5 thin white lines. He needs a quiet place to digest the energy brought by the white line and convert it into his own strength. And in the confinement room, it was the environment that Gu Xia wanted. After 2 days of exploration, Gu Xia finally fully absorbed the 5 white lines. Then he slowly stood up and lightly punched the wall. With a loud bang, Gu Xia punched out a fist mark on the wall. You should know, this is the prison wall, built with reinforced concrete. He looked at the marks on the wall and estimated that he should have 5 times the strength of an adult. TSK, it seems that as long as I keep killing, I can consume energy infinitely and my body can grow infinitely. He crouched down and picked up the falling stones with ease. Gently rub the stones in your hand and shape them into beads. Then he looked up at the sky outside the window. At this moment, the sky has been dyed blood red, and the sun has retreated into the clouds, losing the tranquility of the past sunset. The atmosphere appears extremely oppressive. Are we going to start? He murmured to himself. Prisoner, Gu Xia, it's time for dinner. At that moment, the impatient voice of the prison guard from the beginning came in from outside. The time for ordering the meal has been determined by Gu Xia in the past 2 days, and it is 5:50 p.m. in the evening. He remembers that the apocalypse of the previous life began at 6 o'clock in the evening. A small iron window under the iron door was opened, and a nest was thrown in. Eat it, that's all you deserve, the scum of society. The mocking voice of the prison guards once again reached Gu Xia's ears. Gu Xia lowered her head and silently looked at the food on the ground. Suddenly, he tilted his head and stared at the prison guard, with a gloomy smile in his mouth, walking slowly to the iron gate. In the dark confinement room, half of Gu Xia's face was hidden in the darkness, revealing black eyes that seemed to smile rather than smile. Do you know where the human body is most prone to death? When Gu Xia asked the prison guard this question, his mind immediately froze and he didn't understand why. Before the prison guards could react, there was only a loud bang, and the iron door made a loud noise. The prison guard lowered his head and saw a hand piercing through the iron door, piercing straight into his heart. Tisk, so this is the feeling of the heart beating. In the unwilling gaze of the prison guard, Gu Xia's almost insane tone became his last voice in life. Pussy. Gu Xia exerted a slight force and squeezed the prison guard's heart, pulling back his hand full of blood. And a white thread emerged from the dead prison guard's body, which did not enter Gu Xia's body. Along with it comes all the memories of the prison guards. Immediately after, Gu Xia broke open the lock of the iron door. After walking out, he bent down and gently wiped his blood-stained hands back and forth on the prison guard's body. Then he found the access card for the weapons room on the prison guard. He stared at the access card in his hand, with a proud smile on his lips. Then he stood up and strode towards the place where the weapons were stored in the prison guard's memory. At the same time, a piercing alarm sounded inside the prison. At this moment, other parts of the prison, whether it's prisoners in the cell or prison guards patrolling outside the hallway, they suddenly start convulsing all over and spitting blood at the mouth. In just a few minutes, the convulsing person turned into corpses lying motionless on the ground. Just when other people without convulsions want to move forward and see what's happening. Suddenly, the dead body suddenly opened its eyes and stood up in a strange posture. Without waiting for anyone else to react, he opened his bloody mouth and bit at the person who was still in a state of shock. Such a bloody scene, not only in prison, but also the entire Y City, the entire Blue Star. The apocalypse has begun. Chapter 3. Awakening Dual Abilities. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ah, let go of me. Damn it, I was bitten. Help me. Killing, where are the prison guards? Why isn't there anyone to take care of it? Wails of grief kept coming from the prison. At this moment, Gu Xia was still strolling through the passage of the prison. At a corner, as soon as he turned his head, he saw a male zombie dressed in police uniform lying on the ground, crazily biting a woman in another military medical uniform. TSK, killing has energy. I wonder if killing zombies has energy. Gu Xia stared at the zombie with a wicked smile at the corner of her mouth. Immediately, he took out a small stone and threw it forcefully towards the zombie still eating. The small stone hit the zombie's head with a precise thud like a popping sound. Immediately afterwards, Gu Xia saw a thin gray-white thread emerge from the body of the zombie and enter his body. He squinted his eyes and felt the energy brought by the gray-white thin lines. After a moment, Gu Xia frowned slightly and curled her lips. "Pooh, there is, but it's not enough. It seems that energy can also be classified into levels and colors." Gu Xia roasted about the lack of energy given by zombies and walked towards the military doctor. "Help me." A hoarse female voice came from the mouth of the military doctor. Gu Xia walked slowly to the side of the female military doctor, looking down at her with a harmless smile in her mouth. The female military doctor thought that Gu Xia was going to save her and quickly raised her hand. But the next moment, a small stone hit her head with a loud, pop sound. The female military doctor maintained her incredible expression until her death. "Tisk, living in such pain, killing you is also a kind of liberation, isn't it good?" Gu Xia played with the small stone in her hand and glanced at the military doctor with only half of his body left. As the white thin thread carried the memories of the military doctor into Gu Xia's body, he continued walking forward without looking back. After a moment, Gu Xia followed her memory and arrived at the medical room at another corner. There is no one inside, it seems like only a military doctor is on duty. Then he opened the medicine storage area in the medical room and took out a military backpack, just as he was putting the medicine inside. Suddenly, Gu Xia felt a piercing pain in her head. Is this a precursor to awakening abilities? I already have the ability to devour, don't I? When ancient Xia awakened in the previous life, he experienced such pain. But isn't awakening supposed to happen organically on the third day after the apocalypse? Ignoring the piercing pain in her head, Gu Xia picked up her backpack and endured the pain. She stumbled to the door and locked the door of the medical room. I don't know how long this pain will last. If a zombie suddenly comes in, he will feel cold. After closing the door, Gu Xia let out a muffled snort, unable to bear the pain anymore, and fell to the ground trembling incessantly. Completely unaware that all the medicine in the backpack had spilled onto the ground. In just a few breaths, his whole body was soaked in cold sweat, and the pain made his consciousness begin to blur, even if he gritted his teeth hard and endured it. In the end, the pain passed out. Hiss, my head hurts so much. In a daze, Gu Xia gradually opened her eyes and sat up with one hand covering her head, struggling. He shook his head slightly, and the pain was gradually fading. After the pain had completely disappeared, he knew he had awakened another ability. He felt his consciousness connect to a dark space, about the size of a basketball court. Can this space store items? He had a sudden idea. Then he casually grabbed the medicine bottle on the ground, and with a movement of his mind, the medicine bottle in his hand disappeared. The moment of disappearance also surprised Gu Xia greatly. Because when his consciousness entered the dark space, he discovered the disappearing bottle of medicine. That is to say, he now possesses two supernatural powers. A devouring ability that can absorb energy, and a space ability that can store things. In the TV of the previous life, Gu Xia learned from the Heavenly Eye organization that abilities are also classified into strong and weak levels. And his devouring ability is the lowest level D. Some that can awaken and strengthen the body are at level C, those that awaken ordinary elements are at level B, and those that awaken rare elements are at level A. If there are even rarer special elements, they will be rated as S. level. The second spatial element awakened by ancient Xia is the S. level ability. Then he collected all the medicines on the ground into his own space. Pack all the things that can be taken away in the medical room. Just as Gu Xia was about to leave, bang, the sound of knocking the door came from outside. Roar. The sound of knocking on the door was mixed with the roar of zombies. Gu Xia knew that it must have been her own voice just now that attracted nearby zombies. Bang bang. As the number of door bangs increased, the glass on the door was also squeezed out. Several zombie heads squeezed in through the doors and windows, roaring wildly at Gu Xia. TSK, is this an inappropriate target? Gu Xia looked at the heads of several zombies on the door and grinned. Then he threw 3 stones in his hand in a row. Shoo shoo. The stone unexpectedly made a piercing sound and directly exploded the heads of 3 zombies. At the same time, the gate was also overwhelmed and knocked down by the zombies behind it. In an instant, 4 zombies dressed in police uniforms rushed in and ran towards Gu Xia. Gu Xia calmly took a few steps back and stepped onto the edge of the hospital bed. Pushed the hospital bed onto the aisle to block the zombies' fierce attack. Then he threw out only 2 small stones left in his hand. After accurately hitting the heads of 2 of the zombies, he did not retreat but instead advanced. In 3 or 2 steps, Gu Xia arrived in front of the zombie. I saw him step on the ground with 1 foot and knee bump towards the head of a zombie. Bang! The powerful impact force directly knocked the zombie's head and spine out. Fountain-like black and red blood spurted out from the neck of the headless zombie. With only 1 zombie left, he opened his bloody mouth and turned his head to bite Gu Xia. Gu Xia chuckled contemptuously, clasping her hands and vigorously patting the zombie's head. Bang! The zombie's head was smashed like a watermelon by Gu Xia, and a black and red liquid mixed with a foul odor splattered onto his face. The medical room fell silent again, with only a faint sound of blood dripping onto the ground. The entire medical room was filled with a foul and bloody smell. At the same time, 7 gray-white thin lines sank into Gu Xia's body. Gu Xia casually picked up the sheets from the hospital bed, wiped the blood from her face and hands, and walked over the zombie's body before leaving the medical room. After a moment, he successfully arrived at the weapons room according to the prison guard's memory. He pushed the door and found that the door to the weapons room was tightly closed. Immediately, he took out the access card he had taken from the prison guard and placed it in the sensing area. With a beep, the door opened smoothly. As soon as she walked in, Gu Xia was intimidated by the weapons inside. A room of less than 10 square meters is filled with various thermal weapons. Shotguns, submachine guns, rifles, and even sniper guns are arranged in rows and upright. The pitch-black muzzle was like a sleeping beast, ready to awaken at any moment. There are countless types of bullets, hand grenades, flash grenades, and smoke grenades. In addition to weapons, there are about 50 sets of explosion-proof clothes and helmets. This is not a weapons room, it's just an arsenal. Gu Xia held a smile in her mouth and collected everything into her own space without any hesitation. After finishing everything, he looked out the window at the huge granary. It's also time to pass. Chapter 4. Release from Prison. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As soon as they left the weapons room, 2 zombies dressed in prison police uniforms appeared head-on. Gu Xia leaned slightly to avoid the open fangs of the 2 zombies. Then he took out a well-loaded pistol from the dark space, aimed it at the back of the zombie's head, and pulled the trigger. Bang bang, 2 gunshots echoed in the hallway of the prison. At the same time, 2 dead zombies drifted out 2 thin gray-white threads and sank into Gu Xia's body. Gu Xia squinted her eyes and felt the energy brought by the 10 gray-white thin lines. Cut, the energy of 10 gray-white thin lines is not as good as that of a white line, which is not as fast as killing directly. Gu Xia frowned and glanced at the zombie corpses on the ground with disdain. Now he has the energy brought by 7 white lines in his body, which is 7 times more powerful than that of an adult. Roar. Suddenly, a roar of zombies came from the end of the aisle. Oh, the zombies have all come over. Gu Xia listened to the roaring sounds coming from the end, and the corners of her mouth gradually rose. Immediately, he put the pistol back into space and took out 2 large-capacity submachine guns. A few seconds later, a steady stream of zombies emerged at the end of the passage. TSK, no matter how few mosquitoes there are, they are still meat, and no matter how little energy a zombie has, their energy is not. Gu Xia, with a crazy smile, picked up 2 submachine guns and forcefully pulled the trigger at the zombie swarm. Bang bang bang. 2 submachine guns instantly erupted with strong flames. The 2 submachine guns with a capacity of 50 rounds were emptied of their magazines within 4 seconds. Although Gu Xia did not deliberately aim, the 100 bullets still effectively blocked the zombies' progress. Many zombies fell to the ground, but in the blink of an eye, the group of corpses behind them were patched up. Upon seeing this, Gu Xia threw away the gun with an empty magazine and took out 2 submachine guns of the same model from the space. Using the same formula, continue to kill all the advancing zombies. This time he changed to spot shooting mode and aimed at the nearby zombie head to shoot. Bang bang bang. After clearing the magazine again, there were finally no zombies standing up in the aisle. Only the undead zombies in front are still tirelessly crawling towards the ancient summer. TSK, harvest time has arrived. Gu Xia still maintained a terrifying smile, pulled out a police dagger and aimed it at the heads of the zombies lying on the ground, piercing them straight in. Pwai, pwai. The heads of zombies were poked like watermelons, one by one. While Gu Xia was still working hard to harvest, dozens of gray-white thin threads emerged from the remaining zombie corpses, flying towards Gu Xia together. Gu Xia sensed something and turned around to take a closer look. Before he had a chance to react, all the gray-white threads had penetrated into his body. Gu Xia trembled in place, this was his first time. After a moment, with furrowed brows, he slowly stood up, exhaled a mouthful of turbid air, and lowered his head to look at his fist. It seems that the energy of 100 gray-white lines is equivalent to 1 white line. Then Gu Xia glanced at the zombie corpses covered in police uniforms. He suddenly had an idea in his mind. Then he took a step and walked towards the direction of the cell he had just stayed in when he was in prison. Hiss roar. As soon as Gu Xia arrived at the entrance of the prison area, he heard the raging roar of zombies inside. Accompanied by the roaring sound, there was also a nauseating stench. Gu Xia opened the iron gate with an access card and Lan Ting walked in leisurely. It seemed to smell the scent of ancient Xia humans, and the zombies in the cell roared even harder. With the arrival of ancient summer, the zombies kept crashing into the prison door, intending to tear the humans outside into pieces. TSK, these are all experiences of white flowers. Gu Xia glanced at the number of cells, raised the corner of her mouth, and then took out a pistol from the dark space. She walked to the door of the first cell and raised the pistol. Bang bang. The 2 consecutive gunshots also completely triggered Gu Xia's unilateral massacre in the prison cell. For a full 30 minutes, Gu Xia finally killed all the zombies in the entire prison cell. A total of 220 gray-white thin lines were obtained. With the absorption experience of the past 2 days, Gu Xia is now able to absorb the energy brought by the gray-white fine thread while digesting and converting it into her own strength. This killing also increased Gu Xia's power tenfold. Then, using the memories of the prison guards, he strode towards the prison gate. Gu Xia opened the iron gate of the prison with an access card and officially walked out of the prison. He stood in front of the prison gate, and in the distance, 2 cars collided directly with each other because they couldn't avoid each other. The sound of collisions echoed through the entire street. The man in the car struggled to escape from the car, but the next moment he was knocked down by a zombie rushing in. The collision of vehicles generates a large amount of sparks, instantly igniting the zombie's body. But the zombie is still gnawing on the man who escaped from the car. And more zombies are swarming in, rushing towards the men and dividing their food. Boom! The sparks burst out and ignited the leaked gasoline, causing a violent explosion. In the blink of an eye, several zombies and men were blown to pieces. TSK, what a great experience, it's all wasted. Gu Xia raised her hand to block her forehead, squinted her eyes slightly, and stared with a hint of regret at the explosion in the distance. Then he turned around and walked towards the direction of the grain warehouse next to the prison with the words Sui Liang written on it. After a moment, Gu Xia walked to the front door of the grain warehouse. I saw that the height of the gate could be compared to the height of the prison gate. And it is still in a tightly closed state, indicating that no one is currently attacking or escaping. But for the ancient Xia, which has already experienced a tenfold increase, this high gate is not a problem at all. Subsequently, Gu Xia's knees slightly bent, and she suddenly exerted force under her feet, instantly lifting herself several meters higher. He jumped up high, grabbed the upper edge of the door with one hand, and with a slight effort, easily jumped over the door and landed steadily. Clash! Just as Gu Xia landed, he heard the sound of broken glass next to him. He turned his head to look at the sound. Unexpectedly, a hunched zombie with white hair smashed the glass in the security booth and was stuck at the window, constantly waving its teeth and claws towards Gu Xia. TSK, this huge granary actually has an old man as a security guard. Gu Xia pursed a smile and let out a sound. He walked over calmly and bent down to pick up a piece of glass shard. Gently swing towards the head of the zombie. The glass hit the zombie's eye socket with a precise thud, completely losing its vitality. The entire granary park has returned to silence. Gu Xia looked at the empty park and couldn't help feeling a bit strange. TSK, regardless of whether he is a human or a zombie, anyone who dares to block their way will be killed. Subsequently, he fumbled for a pack of cigarettes from the pocket of the deceased zombie, lit one, and exhaled a cigarette ring. With a nearly crazy smile on his lips, he strolled towards the interior of the park. In the building of the park, there is a shaded corner. A pair of red pupils stared fixedly at Gu Xia, who was walking inside. Chapter 5. Red-Eyed Black Cat. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Suiliang Granary has food that can supply half of the population in Y City, making it the third largest granary in China. This includes 500,000 kilograms each of frozen raw and cooked meat from various poultry, corn, packaged rice, potatoes, and various vegetables. The main food, meat, and vegetables are distributed in the three major granaries of the park. Gu Xia narrowed her eyes slightly, touched her chin, and looked at the large introduction screen placed at the entrance of the hall. TSK, 1.5 million pounds, I don't know if the space is enough to finish it. Just as Gu Xia was still pondering the size of space, he suddenly sensed something staring at him somewhere here. He looked around but didn't notice anything. This made his blood boil and he began to anticipate what kind of creature would make him feel a hint of death threat. Immediately after, Gu Xia continued walking towards the hall as if nothing had happened. Arriving at the gate, Gu Xia gently pushed it open. A strong smell of blood rushed in. Gu Xia frowned slightly and covered her mouth and nose with her hand, scanning her surroundings. It was found that human corpses were everywhere in the hall, with a large number of limbs and organs scattered on the ground. From the frightened expression on the body, it can be seen that these people must have seen something terrifying before their lives. Gu Xia casually picked up a broken leg from the ground and carefully observed it before her eyes. Discovered that the disconnection was very neat, as if it had been cut off by a sharp object. Is anyone there? Gu Xia casually threw away her broken leg and shouted into the depths of the hall, it's the sound of a living person squeaking, it's the roar of a zombie. After waiting for a long time, Gu Xia's voice did not receive a response. He could only shrug his shoulders and prepare to continue walking inside. Just a few steps away, Gu Xia once again felt the threat of death. And this time, the feeling became even more pronounced, causing his entire body to stand erect with sweat and hair. Suddenly, a cold light hit him horizontally at the back waist. But Gu Xia, who was already prepared, had already sensed the attack. I saw him push his feet slightly hard on the ground, jumping into the air and avoiding the fatal blow. The cold light hit the wall, revealing 3 distinct scratches. Before he could land, I noticed a black shadow flashing past him in the afterglow. The black shadow bounced back and forth on the wall a few times, and suddenly attacked Gu Xia, who had just landed again. Gu Xia stared fiercely at the black figure and grinned. He didn't retreat but instead advanced, heading straight towards the black shadow. At the same time, the black shadow came to Gu Xia in the blink of an eye. Another cold light shot out from the black shadow. Shoo! Gu Xia turned over and dodged the attack of the black shadow again. Taking advantage of the situation, she exerted force on her waist and swung her fist to hit the black shadow. Bang! A sharp and mournful cry emanated from the darkness. After Gu Xia succeeded in his attack, he was about to take advantage of the sniper attack, but the black shadow jumped up to the second floor of the hall and stood at the railing on the second floor, staring coldly at Gu Xia. At this moment, Gu Xia finally saw clearly that it was a big black cat with blood-colored pupils, all over its body. Rather than being a cat, it can only be said to be like a cat, because this cat is actually over 3 meters long by sight. TSK, can even animals mutate? In his previous life, he was hiding at home and had no idea about the changes in the outside world. I don't know if killing this big black cat will give me energy to devour it. Gu Xia extended her tongue to lick her dry lips, and a crazy smile reappeared at the corner of her mouth. The big black cat stared at Gu Xia, but in the next moment, it turned around and ran away. Hey, don't leave! Gu Xia shouted and immediately chased towards the second floor. But when we reached the second floor, we found that the big black cat had long disappeared. Gu Xia slowed down and looked around cautiously. He found a large office on the second floor of the lobby, which should be the usual place for the granary workers to work. At the end of the office corridor, Gu Xia, who had a keen hearing, heard the sound of iron chains constantly being struck. Gu Xia, who was already in an excited state, took a step forward and walked over. Arriving at the door, he saw an iron chain firmly locking the handle of the door. The roar of zombies echoed through the door. Gu Xia pulled the iron chain and found that it had been cut off by a sharp object. At the same time, the sound of zombie collisions became increasingly intense. Bang! The door was knocked open, and more than 10 zombies swarmed out inside. Surprisingly, they would use zombies to distract my attention. With just a few zombies, doesn't it look down on me a bit? Gu Xia was amazed by the intelligence of the black cat, but as she looked at the more than 10 zombies in front of her, she pouted and shook her head. Then he wrapped the iron chain around his right hand and swung his iron fist at the approaching zombie. A fist with a 10-fold increase in strength instantly exploded the zombie's head. Bang bang bang. Gu Xia threw several heavy punches in a row, and in less than an hour, he dealt with all over 10 zombies. While absorbing more than 10 gray-white thin lines, Gu Xia looked towards the direction leading to the third floor. Just as Gu Xia seemed to relax, the big black cat reappeared behind him, intending to ambush him. Gu Xia suddenly looked back and smiled at the black cat, with that terrifying smile in her mouth. All of this is a slight flaw intentionally made by Gu Xia. The black cat clearly did not expect Gu Xia to turn her head to look at it, and a hint of panic appeared in her crimson pupils. I caught you. The black cat, whose strategy was exposed, knew it was not a match for the humans in front of it and turned around wanting to run. But unfortunately, Gu Xia had already anticipated the action of the black cat in advance and grabbed its tail with one hand. I saw Gu Xia grabbing her tail and continuously throwing it left and right towards the ground. After throwing the big black cat into a state of 7 meat and 8 vegetables, Gu Xia raised his iron fist and suddenly forcefully smashed it towards the head of the big black cat. The head of the big black cat is like a watermelon being smashed, with red and white liquid splashing everywhere. Then he broke one of the paws of the big black cat and collected it as a collectible in the space. It's not good to be bare-handed, we need to find a suitable cold weapon. Gu Xia pulled over the body of a zombie and slowly wiped the red and white liquid from its hands on its clothes. Even though Gu Xia now has a mobile arsenal, he still has a preference for ancient cold weapons despite his martial arts background. At this moment, a thin white line with a green tint floated out of the dead black cat's body. Gu Xia's heart was filled with joy, and indeed the mutated animals also had energy. After the thin thread came out of the body, it went straight into Gu Xia's body. He squinted his eyes slightly, enjoying the energy brought by the thin thread. Not bad, it's equivalent to the energy of 10 white lines. After a moment, Gu Xia slowly stood up, threw the iron chain in her hand casually on the ground, and walked towards the stairs leading to the 3rd floor. After arriving at the 3rd floor, Gu Xia discovered that the door was locked from the inside. This made him even more convinced that there was someone on the 3rd floor who was locking in those zombies on the 2nd floor. Then he tapped on the door with his knuckles and shouted towards the inside, "Is there anyone inside?" Although Gu Xia's voice was not loud, it appeared very loud in this quiet environment. "Are you sent by the army to save us? Don't shout so loudly, there's a big black cat outside, it's so scary." Soon, a slightly crying female voice came from inside. Then I heard the sound of the door unlocking. A woman in work clothes opened the door halfway and revealed half of her frightened face, looking at Gu Xia. His eyes were constantly scanning behind Gu Xia. Gu Xia smiled with a self-proclaimed harmless smile and said, "I'm not an army, I'm just passing by. Can I go in?" Little did they know that Gu Xia's smile, in the eyes of a woman, was as terrifying as a demon from hell. Chapter 6. Occupy the Granary, you can leave now. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Are you a prisoner? The woman's voice carried an immense sense of terror. In the woman's view, Gu Xia is still wearing the prison uniform. And on the prison uniform, there were bloodstains splattered from his killing of zombies everywhere, which were very conspicuous. Combined with his seductive smile and calm tone, the overall impression is that he is a newly emerged hellish emissary from a pool of blood. "You don't come over." The woman took a step back and hurriedly wanted to close the door. But Gu Xia wouldn't have given her such a chance. He calmly extended his hand and pressed it against the door. At the same time, several men holding explosion-proof forks appeared behind the door. The leading man shouted to Gu Xia, "Get out of here now, we don't welcome you." "Xiao Qi, close the door." As soon as she finished speaking, the woman called Xiao Qi tried even harder to close the door. But the door was pressed down by Gu Xia and remained motionless. Gu Xia gently pushed the door open, while the woman was knocked down to the ground. He walked slowly into the door and closed it with his back hand. Then he spread out his hands and shrugged his shoulders, saying innocently, "I say I passed by without any malice." "Then you can leave now, why do you still come in?" The leading man also showed a hint of fear upon seeing this, trembling as he raised his explosion-proof fork and aimed it at Gu Xia. "Don't be nervous, I just want to borrow your phone," Gu Xia said sincerely. Although he said he was borrowing something, his gaze casually scanned the situation behind him. It was discovered that in addition to the 3 men who came out and the woman known as Xiaoqi, there were also 2 men and 2 women behind. "As an exchange, I can tell you some useful information." Gu Xia spoke to the man in charge. Just as the man was still hesitating. "Give it to him, Xiao Wu." A magnetic male voice came from behind. Gu Xia heard the sound and saw a man in a dark brown suit, with a delicate face and thin gold-rimmed glasses walking out from behind. "This friend, my name is Fu Wenwen and I am the general manager of Swailong Grain Warehouse. I don't know what my friend calls me." Fu Wenwen pushed his gold-rimmed glasses up with 2 fingers, and a polite smile hung in his mouth. TSK, why does this name sound a bit familiar? Gu Xia squinted her eyes, but couldn't remember for a moment. He didn't answer Fu Wenwen's question, but turned to Xiao Wu and said, "Your leader said, can I borrow my phone?" Fu Wenwen chose to ignore Gu Xia when he saw him, and a hint of gloom flashed in his eyes. But soon he hid it and continued speaking, "Xiao Wu, it's just a phone. It's good to get useful news. Right, this friend." Gu Xia could clearly hear that Fu Wenwen had something to say. Fu Wenwen's words were quite useful, and Xiao Wu also took out his phone from his pocket. After receiving the phone handed over by Xiao Wu, Gu Xia immediately dialed the familiar number. Doodle doodle. Although it was connected, no one answered. Did something happen to my younger sister? The number Gu Xia dialed was his sister's. In the previous life, Gu Xia received a call from her sister and was able to survive for 10 days in the apocalypse. But in this life, he was imprisoned for murder, so he naturally couldn't receive calls from his sister. This kept him in his heart. However, in the phone call from the previous life, my younger sister mentioned that she was going to work at a shelter in Kyoto and there should be no danger in the short term. After all, she was in Kyoto. Friend, you also called. Shouldn't you tell us the information you said? Fu Wenwen's voice was still so gentle, but there was already a hint of impatience. Gu Xia's thoughts were pulled back to reality, and he looked into Fu Wenwen's eyes and said, "The black cat outside has already died." Dead. That black cat killed dozens of our colleagues. How did it die? Did he kill him? As soon as Gu Xia's words were spoken, others began to discuss. Finally, Fu Wenwen raised his hand to signal silence, and the discussion gradually stopped. Then Fu Wenwen smiled and said, "Friend, you said the black cat died. But there is evidence. No, believe it or not." Gu Xia spread out her hands and looked indifferent. "Oh, by the way, I want to keep your phone for now." Gu Xia turned around and smiled at Xiao Wu. After listening, Xiao Wu immediately raised his eyebrows in anger and his face turned red. He pointed at Gu Xia and cursed loudly, "You said you were borrowing, but now you want to take my phone again. What's the difference between this and a thief? This friend, it doesn't seem very appropriate for you to do so." Fu Wenwen also stood up at this moment. Gu Xia snapped her fingers and looked at Fu Wenwen, saying, "Manager Fu, right. I need to borrow something from you." Upon hearing this, Fu Wenwen couldn't help but frown slightly. He said slightly displeased, "Friend, you said you wanted to borrow your phone, but I asked my subordinate to borrow it. It's a bit excessive for you to not only refuse to return it after using it, but also want to borrow my things now." Gu Xia's mouth gradually curved upwards, revealing a crazy smile. Immediately after, he suddenly exerted force under his feet and appeared in front of Fu Wenwen. He grabbed the collar of his suit with one hand and easily lifted Fu Wenwen up. "Since you're not borrowing, I'll have to pick it up myself." Gu Xia's voice instantly made Fu Wenwen feel like he had fallen into an ice cave, enveloped by a breath of death. Don't, my friend. It's easy to say something. What do you want to borrow?" After speaking, I didn't forget to give Gu Xia an awkward smile. After listening, Gu Xia put down Fu Wenwen and said 4 words from her mouth. "The key to the granary." As soon as these words were spoken, everyone was taken aback. They never expected that the prisoner in front of them would actually want the key to the granary. "I can't give it to him, manager. The key belongs to the government. You're actually thinking of setting up a granary, you're committing a crime." Xiao Wu and Xiao Qi shouted loudly at the same time. "You two, shut up." Fu Wenwen angrily rebuked the two. He personally felt the feeling of death, wasn't it pushing him up a cliff? And those two people, seeing Fu Wenwen so angry for the first time, immediately obediently closed their mouths and dared not say a word more. Then he took out the access card for the granary from his pocket and said to Gu Xia, friend, this is the access card that can open the granary. But if you think about it, taking this card is going against the government in China. Before he could finish speaking, he handed out the access card with both hands. But only Gu Xia, who has lived a lifetime, knows that there is no government nowadays. In the early days of the apocalypse, society was in a state of anarchy. At this stage, it is the most chaotic, with everything including burning, killing, looting, and so on. Only on the 8th day after the end of the world did the government gradually rebuild. Gu Xia withdrew the access card and calmly put it into her pocket. Then he walked to a seat in front of everyone, sat down, and crossed his legs onto the table. You can go now. This granary will be mine from now on. Chapter 7. Gold Infiltration Axe. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Gu Xia's words instantly ignited the anger of others. What are you saying? There are all those cannibalistic monsters outside. If you drive us away, isn't that asking us to go and die? Don't go too far. A few people pointed and nodded at Gu Xia again. There is no regard for Gu Xia's identity as a prisoner at all. Fu Wenwen's eyes were uncertain, and after a moment, he signaled his subordinates to stop. Then a person walked up to Gu Xia and slowly spoke, "Friend, can you see if we can stay here?" "We will leave immediately when the government's army arrives," Fu Wenwen said with a hint of prayer. "No, we can't go immediately." Gu Xia chose to close her eyes and rest with her head in her arms. Fu Wenwen saw that Gu Xia had completely ignored him, and a hint of ferocity flashed in his eyes. Then, with a snort, he angrily turned around and left. At this moment, Gu Xia finally remembered who the person in front of her was. 3 days after the end of the previous life, a special organization called Tianyan suddenly appeared on TV. I learned on Gu Xia TV that such a number 1 character has appeared. He used a poisonous mist to rot all the zombies in the entire area, and then occupied land as a king. Burning, killing, looting, committing all kinds of evil, and even imprisoning women. Countless women died in his hands. Finally, he transformed the base into a new human government, intending to absorb the awakened outside for his own use. It was not until 8 days after the end of the world that the reconstruction of the Chinese government allowed him to slightly restrain himself. The Huaxia government has sent awakeners and soldiers several times to suppress it, but it was not until the moment before the death of Gu Xia that it was cleared. TSK, he is truly a refined and vulgar person, dressed in a beastly attire. Gu Xia suddenly opened her eyes and said, "It's not impossible to stay." Gu Xia's words reignited their hope for survival. After all, asking them to go out was no different from sending them to death. Fu Wenwen was also impressed and then strode forward, asking, "That's not this friend. What conditions do we need to stay?" "It's simple, whoever can walk out of that room is eligible to stay." Gu Xia pointed to the opposite conference room and said, "You villain, isn't it that we're going to kill each other?" Xiao Qi pointed at Gu Xia and shouted angrily. Gu Xia looked at her indifferently and slowly said, "If you don't go, you can leave now. Don't force me to kill anyone." After speaking, he took out a pistol from his pocket and casually threw it on the table. As soon as the pistol was fired, everyone immediately became frightened, and Fu Wenwen was even more frightened as he squeezed into the crowd. Under the coercion and temptation of Gu Xia, everyone entered the conference room. The conference room is made of fully transparent glass, so Gu Xia is not afraid of them making small moves inside. Then Gu Xia saw an interesting scene. At the beginning of entering, everyone still gathered together, with Fu Wenwen waving his hands in the middle, seemingly giving a speech. Then I looked at the expressions of the others and gradually relaxed. But at this moment, Fu Wenwen took out a dagger with a cold light from somewhere and stabbed a man in the back. Then he drew a dagger and slashed it towards the neck of another man. Blood suddenly gushed out of the neck like a fountain. The man who was cut covered his neck and wanted to wave for help. But he was kicked away by Fu Wenwen and struggled on the ground for a few times before making a sound. After killing the two in an instant, Fu Wenwen also completely fell into madness. He wildly waved his dagger and stabbed at the others. At this moment, other people realized that they had not brought weapons in, only Xiao Wu was holding an explosion-proof fork. But Xiao Wu was even more frightened by Fu Wenwen's behavior and curled up in the corner, afraid to move. The splattered blood stained the entire glass red, separating a heaven and a hell. After a moment, the door of the conference room was opened from inside. Fu Wenwen's body was covered in blood, and he supported the door as he stumbled out. And inside the door, all the men were stabbed to death, and several women with weak hands were also cut a few times, lying on the ground with less air intake and more air output. Are you satisfied? Fu Wenwen stared fiercely at Gu Xia. I just asked you to come in and discuss who is willing to leave and who is willing to stay. Gu Xia covered her mouth and looked at Fu Wenwen in surprise, slowly speaking, I didn't ask you to go kill directly. You. Fu Wenwen's anger rushed to his heart, pointing to Gu Xia and spitting out a mouthful of fresh blood, fainting to the ground. Gu Xia stood up from the chair and paced into the conference room. TSK, it's a pity for these men. He looked at the dead men, shook his head, and then walked over to the three fallen women. He crouched down, twisted his neck one by one, and helped them solve their pain. 3 white lines emerged from the body and sank into Gu Xia's body. As the memories of the 3 were swallowed up by Gu Xia, in the memory of one of the women, he obtained something he had been dreaming of. Then he turned around and left the conference room, walking deeper into the passage. A moment later, Gu Xia arrived at the door of the CEO's office, pushed open the door, and according to the woman's memory, he found a button. After pressing it, there was actually a hidden door in the CEO's office. Stepping inside the door, what caught the eye was a secret room of about 50 square meters. There is a large water bed in the center of the secret room, and next to the water bed, there are various cruel props. TSK, this CEO is quite playful. It seems that the relationship between this secretary and the CEO is not ordinary. With a meaningful smile on her lips, Gu Xia looked around the secret room and found a small door next to it. Entering the small room, Gu Xia saw a glass cabinet monster filled with various cold weapons. Inside, he immediately fell in love with the glass cabinet in the furthest corner. He quickly walked forward and found that the glass cabinet was supported by gold. On the base, 2 lifelike dragons are depicted playing with the crystal beads in between. Looking inside the ancient Xia dynasty, a 3-meter-long giant double-edged axe lay on a red velvet cloth with a cold light. He chuckled and raised his fist, hitting the glass cabinet with a punch. Click. The glass shattered and exploded in response, accompanied by the piercing alarm sound and the flickering red light throughout the room. Noisy. Gu Xia frowned slightly, bent down to pick up the glass fragments on the ground, and threw them towards the glowing red lamp. I only heard a loud bang, and the lights and alarms suddenly came to an end. Later, Gu Xia happily picked up the double-edged axe with one hand and carefully examined it. I saw the handle shining silver all over, and a silver dragon wrapped around the entire handle. The patterns on the blade of the axe were like lightning, emitting a cold blue and golden light. TSK, what a beautiful axe. I'll call you the Golden Infiltration Axe in the future. After Gu Xia collected the axe into the space, he left the Chamber of Secrets with satisfaction. When I first arrived at the CEO's office, a weak voice caught Gu Xia's attention. Chapter 8. Early Awakening. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Wu Gu Xia heard the sound and looked around, only to see a yellow dog curled up in a corner of the office, looking at him in fear. He only glanced at the local dog and decided to tame it. Because on the left eye of this native dog, there is the same scar as that of the dog with power in the memory of ancient Xia. He currently doesn't have enough chips to win over this local dog. Therefore, Gu Xia gave a friendly smile to the dog, and then turned around and left the office in the dog's wary eyes. As he passed by the conference room, he found that Fu Wenwen was still in a state of fainting. Then he returned to the secret room and found a rope to tie Fu Wenwen to a chair. After finishing all of this, he will go and do the most important thing in the granary, hoarding grain. Then he left the office building and walked towards a granary behind the park. With a beep, Gu Xia opened the door of the granary with an access card. Inside are various fresh and frozen meats. Gu Xia packed all the meat and stored it in her dark space. At this moment, Gu Xia's consciousness realized that meat only occupied 1/5 of the dark space. That is to say, he can easily accept the other two granaries. After collecting all the meat in the first granary, he continued to walk to another granary. Half an hour later, Gu Xia collected all the food from the 3 granaries into the space. Then he returned to the 3rd floor of the office building again. As soon as he returned to the 3rd floor, he found that Fu Wenwen had already woken up. As soon as Fu Wenwen saw Gu Xia come in, he immediately burst into a fierce curse and said, "Bastard, didn't you say you could stay? Why are you still tying me up?" Gu Xia smiled slightly and slowly spoke, "I just said I could stay, but I didn't say how to stay. Friend, please let me go. I'll leave here now and won't stay. Please, let me go." Fu Wenwen suddenly changed his face and begged Gu Xia to let him leave. "Leaving? It's not up to you," Gu Xia said leisurely before walking towards the CEO's office. "You bastard, let go of me. You must die so hard. I will definitely kill you, you despicable little person." Gu Xia ignored the malicious voice coming from behind and walked straight into the CEO's office. In the corner, he found the terrifying local dog still in a state of panic. Then he took out a cow rib from the space and gently threw it in front of the local dog. "My name is Gu Xia, this bone is for you. Eat it, I have no ill intentions." Gu Xia used a friendly tone to express as much as possible that she had no malice. Although the dog looked at him warily, its nose kept sniffing in front of the cow's ribs. After a moment, he was ultimately defeated by Gu Xia's beef ribs. It left the corner of the wall step by step, and in the moment it picked up its ribs, it returned to the corner again. After returning to the corner, he nibbled heavily. "Eat slowly, there's still something left after finishing." Gu Xia continued to use a friendly tone to suit the dog. TSK, without energy intake for a few days, the hunger in the body has started again. It seems that dual abilities consume a huge amount of energy, and it seems that one must go out hunting. Gu Xia took a bite of corn and then took out a cow rib from the space and threw it at her feet. For the past 2 days, besides throwing a cow rib to the dog every day, Gu Xia has been calling her sister's phone every once in a while. "Dudu, hello. Finally, 2 days later, my sister's phone was connected. It's me, South. Gu Xia stood up excitedly from the chair for a moment. "Who are you?" Due to using someone else's number, the tone on the other end of the phone was very alert. "Gu Xiaoyun. It's me, your brother Gu Xia." Gu Xia answered slightly angrily. After hearing Gu Xia's answer, the other end of the phone suddenly quieted down. "Brother. Is that you? You're still alive, that's great." A few seconds later, Gu Xiaoyun's excited voice suddenly came from the other end of the phone, causing Gu Xia's ears to ring. Gu Xia listened to Gu Xiaoyun's slightly crying excitement, and the big stone in her heart was finally let go. "Xiaoyun, how are you doing on your end? Is it safe?" Gu Xia inquired about Gu Xiaoyun's safety with concern. "The base is temporarily safe, but the Chinese government is currently preoccupied with internal cleanup. Brother, you have to be careful yourself. My leader said that zombies in other urban areas have already begun to evolve, and their strength and agility are stronger than the previous 2 days. Gu Xiaoyun told Gu Xia all the information she knew. Gu Xia was slightly taken aback, but then smiled and said, "It's okay Xiaoyun, I can take care of myself. Don't worry, you also need to protect yourself and don't show off." These pieces of information are indeed very important for Gu Xia. After all, he has been talking about emotions with a dog these past 2 days and has no knowledge of the outside world. At this point, the local dog had completely relaxed its vigilance towards Gu Xia and was able to let him touch his head and belly. At this moment, the phone from Gu Xiaoyun's side heard bursts of electric current. Gu Xia quickly asked, "What's wrong, Xiaoyun? Did something happen?" "Brother. I'll call you later, Zizizi. Run quickly Xiaoyun, they're attacking." Then came the sound of the phone being hung up from across the street. Gu Xiaoyun felt a big upset and quickly dialed the phone again, but the phone was already unreachable. Gu Xia knows that there must be something wrong with Gu Xiaoyun's side. At this moment, a heart-wrenching cry came into Gu Xia's ears, accompanied by a huge wave of energy. He had a crazy smile on his lips, and then he stood up and walked quickly out of the office. Upon entering the hall, Gu Xia noticed that Fu Wenwen, who was bound with his hands and feet, was now gathering a purple-black mist all over his body. The mist almost completely engulfed Fu Wenwen's body, while Fu Wenwen's hands and feet kept twitching and his face screamed in pain. TSK, have you started awakening in just 2 days? Is it because of one's own rebirth that has accelerated the time for human awakening and zombie evolution? Gu Xia suspected that she might have caused the butterfly effect. Suddenly, all the purple-black mist was sucked into Fu Wenwen's body. Fu Wenwen suddenly opened his eyes, and his pupils turned purple-black. Although he didn't understand what had changed in his body, he felt full of strength at the moment. But when he suddenly looked up, he found a black hole pointing at him. Goodbye. Gu Xia decisively pulled the trigger and only heard a bang, killing Fu Wenwen with one shot. Poor Fu Wenwen, he didn't know what was going on when he was hit by Gu Xia's head. And all of this is the calculation of ancient Xia. He wants to know how much energy he can gain if he kills an awakener himself. After a moment, he received the answer. A pure green thin line drifted out of Fu Wenwen's body and flew towards Gu Xia. Chapter 9. Wang Ergu's Awakening. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Gu Xia squinted her eyes, enjoying the energy brought by the pure green thread. TSK, a thin green line is equivalent to killing 50 people, so it gives a good feeling. After a moment, the hunger that had been haunting Gu Xia's body was once again satisfied. But he found that this sense of satisfaction was constantly fading. Just one energy is not enough to satisfy his hunger. After recovering slightly, Gu Xia prepared to return to the office and continue to communicate emotions with the local dog. As soon as he stepped into the office, to his surprise, he saw the dog wagging its tail and sticking to it. I haven't been feeding you for free these past few days. Since you want to come with me, let me give you a name. Just Wang Ergou, a pretty nice name. After rubbing her chin for a moment, Gu Xia decided to use this name. Although the earth dog doesn't quite understand the meaning of ancient Xia, when it shouts too much, it knows its name is Wang Ergou. Just as Gu Xia finished naming the second dog and just took out a pig bone, he was preparing to feed the dog. The dog suddenly fell to the ground and couldn't stand up, convulsing all over, constantly wailing. Gu Xia was not worried at all because it was the rhythm of awakening. Then he found a chair to sit down and waited for the dog to awaken successfully. You should know that if it were really the divine dog from the previous life, then he would have found a big bargain. After a moment, the howling of the dog gradually weakened, and Gu Xia sat up straight, patiently waiting. Wang, it hurts me so much. What's going on? Wang, kid, do you know what's going on? A rough voice emerged from the dog's mouth. Gu Xia, who was originally sitting straight, was so frightened that she jumped directly onto the stool. What the hell, a dog can talk. Gu Xia was so scared that even his soul came out, which he had never encountered before. But soon he recovered, and the doomsday zombies had arrived. What's the point of a dog talking? Then he tentatively shouted to the dog, Wang Ergou. Wang Ergou looked up at Gu Xia for a moment, then sat down with both legs, licking his hair and saying, Wang, do you know what happened to me? After receiving a response again, Gu Xia gradually accepted the fact that the dog could speak. Immediately, he began to explain to Wang Ergou what had happened in this world. After Wang Ergou woke up, his intelligence significantly increased, and he was able to understand what Gu Xia said about the end of the world. Have you mastered a skill? After explaining the matter, Gu Xia leaned forward slightly and stared at Wang Ergou, asking her questions. Wang Ergou touched his head with his front paws, pondered for a moment, and then drooled and greedily smiled at Gu Xia. Hee, you'll know if you throw the bone from your hand over. Gu Xia glanced at the pig bone in her hand, and a meaningful smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. Then, with a gentle toss, the pig bone swept through the air in a parabolic trajectory. A magical thing happened, and the pig bone seemed to stop freezing in the air. Although it was only a short second, it also brought great joy to Gu Xia's heart. Because of this dog, he was certain that it was the divine dog from his past life, awakening the ability to control time. Kid, do you see that? From now on, you'll provide me with food and I'll protect you, Wang. Wang Ergou slowly lay down, closed his eyes, and said leisurely. Gu Xia walked over calmly with a hint of penetrating smile in her mouth. He only heard a clang sound and tapped Wang Ergou's head with the knuckles of both hands. Then he squatted down and picked up Wang Ergou's face with a smile, saying, Open your dog's eyes and take a look. Do I need your protection? Then he picked up the pig bone and threw it forcefully towards the window. Bang! In Wang Ergou's shocked eyes, the pig bones flew into the air and made a loud noise, staring Wang Ergou in place. Do I still need your protection? In the eyes of Wang Ergou, Gu Xia's smile was as terrifying as the expression of a butcher holding a butcher's knife as he was about to chop bones and meat. No, master, you will receive my most genuine loyalty. Wang Ergou quickly shook his head and waved his hands wildly. After hearing this, Gu Xia put away the seeping smile. Then he said, All right, don't call me master. My name is Gu Xia, and from now on, you can call me boss. Pack up, we should go out now. After speaking, regardless of whether Wang Ergou was still in shock, he stood up and left the office. Okay boss, wait for me. Wang Ergou regained his composure and saw Gu Xia leave. He quickly followed him with all his might. After leaving the office, Gu Xia first glanced at the body of Fu Wenwen lying on the chair. Then he took 3 or 2 steps and casually took off the golden glasses. After putting it on, I found that the glasses didn't even have a degree. TSK, it's really impressive. Then he pushed down his nose rest and left the 3rd floor satisfied. Although Wang Ergou, who was following behind, could smell the bloody smell outside these days, he couldn't help but shiver when he came out and saw so many corpses. It knows that these corpses were all killed by Gu Xia alone. At the same time, I am very grateful that I did not provoke this god of killing, otherwise I would not know how it died. Then it shook its head, quickened its 4-legged pace, and caught up with Gu Xia who had already descended the stairs. A moment later, 1 person and 1 dog passed through the stairs and returned to the lobby on the 1st floor. At this moment, Wang Ergou suddenly called out to Gu Xia. Boss, I know there's a large supermarket next to the Granary. Why don't we go there and collect some supplies? Gu Xia was taken aback for a moment, thinking that she was also right. Currently, she only has weapons and food, and other items are still relatively scarce. He touched Wang Ergou's head and said, Good dog, that's a good idea. Let's go take a look first. Then one person and one dog walked to the iron gate of the granary, opened it, and prepared to walk towards the direction of the next supermarket. As soon as she left the granary, Gu Xia discovered that the external environment had undergone earth-shattering changes again compared to 2 days ago. Everywhere there is devastation, the bloodstains on the ground have long dried up, and not a single living person can be seen on the streets, not even zombies. People who can survive are all hiding in some place and living a miserable life. And the whereabouts of the zombies, Gu Xia speculated, should have been attracted to other places. He patted Wang Ergu's head and said, "Let's go, lead the way." At the same time, after Gu Xia and his companions left the granary, Fu Wenwen, who was originally lying on a chair, suddenly moved his finger. A purple-black mist emerged from his mouth, and then he suddenly opened his eyes. I saw more and more purple-black mist, and Fu Wenwen's body began to gradually atomize. In the end, his whole body became a mist and broke free from constraints. Subsequently, the purple-black mist reorganized into a human form, and Fu Wenwen's appearance gradually became apparent. Fu Wenwen looked at his hands in confusion and then shifted his gaze to the chair. The memory of Gu Xia shooting him keeps replaying in his mind. His puzzled expression gradually became angry, and his fist turned into a purple-black mist air hammer on the table. Instantly shatter the table. He roared up to the sky and said, "Gu Xia. Wait, I will definitely kill you." Chapter 10. Supermarket Storm. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Be quick, move quietly, and don't attract zombies. Gu Xia had just reached a corner when a hoarse voice came into his ears. He turned half his head and saw about 10 people sneaking towards the supermarket with their cat bodies. "Master, what should we do now?" At this moment, Wang Ergou also leaned over and turned his head to look at the supermarket. Let's go too. I don't want my things to be taken by anyone else." Gu Xia narrowed her eyes and walked towards the supermarket. Such a swaggering motion also caught the attention of those people. A bald man walked out of the crowd. He reached out a hand and pointed to Gu Xia, who was walking towards him, saying in a hoarse voice, "Brother, what we are interested in here first is that you can leave." Gu Xia seemed to be unable to hear, and her movements kept moving forward without stopping. "You don't want to be shameless, right? Didn't you hear what Tiger Brother said?" At this moment, a short man walked out and stared at Gu Xia in anger. "Our Tiger Brother is known as the Awakened One. Do you know what the Awakened One is? Believe it or not, burn you to death with a flame." The short man pointed to the threat posed by the so-called Tiger Man to Gu Xia. Gu Xia raised her eyes, with a hint of madness flashing in her eyes and a crazy smile on her lips. In the blink of an eye, she walked up to the short man. Seeking death. The short man saw that Gu Xia didn't pay any attention to him, and his heart froze. He raised his wrench and threw it fiercely at Gu Xia. Bang! The wrench hit Gu Xia's head and made a metallic collision sound. The short man looked incredulously at the completely bent wrench in his hand, and looked up at Gu Xia in terror. "Tisk, do you know where the human body is most prone to death?" Gu Xia said slowly, staring at the short man with a playful expression. The short man didn't care about the meaning of Gu Xia's words, threw away the wrench in his hand, pulled out a dagger from behind, and suddenly stabbed it. Gu Xia slightly dodged the short man's attack and immediately wrapped her hand around his dagger arm like a dragon. Then only a click was heard, and Gu Xia forcefully tore off the short man's hand. Blood spurted out like a column of water. Immediately after, Gu Xia strode forward, grabbing the unloaded arm and turning it around. The dagger swung fiercely towards the small man's eye socket. With a whoosh, the dagger plunged straight into the small man's eye socket. The strong thrust caused the short man to fly backwards for several meters, fall to the ground and twitch a few times, losing his breath. This scene came too quickly, and Tiger Brother, who was originally waiting to watch a good show, was stunned by Gu Xia's methods. "Kill him for me." Although Tiger Brother was intimidated by Gu Xia in his heart, he couldn't lose face in front of his subordinates. Later, Tiger Brother took out a kitchen knife from his waist and said viciously, "There are only one of the more than 10 of us. What are you afraid of? Give it to me." Perhaps Tiger's words had a certain uplifting effect, and more than 10 people took out their weapons to attack Gu Xia. "Who said I'm only one person?" Gu Xia raised her hand and gestured. In that moment, amidst the inexplicable gazes of everyone, time seemed to stop. 1 second is enough for Gu Xia. I saw him take out a submachine gun from the dark space and shoot wildly at the person nailed to the ground. The frozen person is unable to move at all and can only allow bullets to penetrate their own bodies. Bang bang bang. The submachine gun, emitting flames, swept across. As time passed, everyone except Tiger Brother was killed by submachine guns as targets. Gu Xia looked at Tiger Brother playfully and slowly spoke, "I still have a dog." At this moment, Wang Ergou walked out calmly from behind Gu Xia and raised his eyebrows towards Brother Hu, saying, "How about it? I am also an awakener, dog lord." "Damn you." Tiger Brother ignored the fear in his heart, and then the thin element of fire began to gather around him. After a few breaths, Tiger Brother's hands converged into a ball of fire. He looked at the fireball in his hand and chuckled inwardly, "You're not at a disadvantage to die in my fireball. Let's show you the abilities of the Fire Awakener." After speaking, he raised his hand and threw the fireball towards Gu Xia. Gu Xia not only did not dodge, but also stood in place. The fireball hit Gu Xia solidly, and with a loud bang, a burst of smoke rose up. Tiger Brother looked at Gu Xia's position with a hint of pride, thinking that if he was hit by a fireball, he would definitely be burned into a fiery person and eventually turn into a pile of coke. But when the smoke dissipated, Tiger Brother's pupils were shocked and his expression became as if he had seen a ghost. "This is impossible, absolutely impossible." Tiger Brother stared fixedly at Gu Xia walking out of the smoke, his legs constantly retreating. "You can't be completely unharmed, this is a lie, right?" Tiger Brother has completely lost his fighting spirit at this moment, only thinking about how to escape. Although Gu Xia's clothes are a bit burnt at this moment, the fireball cannot cause any damage to him. He patted the ash on his body and casually said, "You're the one who ignites the fire, still called the Fire Awakener. In the next life, don't do anything foolish." As soon as he finished speaking, Gu Xia had already arrived behind Tiger Brother. Then he twisted his hands and broke Tiger's head. Just as Gu Xia was eagerly waiting for the thin thread, he suddenly noticed that gray thin threads had emerged from the ordinary human bodies that had already died. On Tiger Brother's body, there are thin white lines without even a hint of green. TSK, it seems that my devouring ability has advanced, and all the previous fine threads have been reduced by 1 level. He estimated that he should be considered a second-order awakener now. The awakening of the second order was also learned by Gu Xia through the heavenly eye in the previous life's television. The newly awakened are called first-order awakeners, and can evolve to second-order through energy intake. Third-order evolution is already the highest known rank in his previous life. As for the condition for evolution, it is to remove an energy crystal called a brain crystal from the zombie's head. By absorbing brain crystals, evolution is completed. But Gu Xia doesn't need to absorb brain crystals to complete evolution directly, which is also a benefit of his ability to devour. Gu Xia put away the smile at the corner of her mouth and squinted to feel a sense of hunger. Indeed, it was found that the energy brought by these fine threads was no longer sufficient to satisfy the deep-seated hunger. We can only barely maintain it and not let him go crazy. At this moment, Wang Ergou sniffed with his nose and then anxiously said to Gu Xia, "Master, the zombie is here." As soon as the words fell, accompanied by familiar roars, scattered zombies began to emerge in some corners. The appearance of zombies also interrupted Gu Xia's thoughts. He glanced at the zombies popping up everywhere, then walked over to Tiger Brother's body and lifted his foot to kick it 5 meters away. More than 10 corpses were all kicked 5 meters away by Gu Xia and scattered. This should be able to stop the zombies' footsteps. Let's go and enter the supermarket. Gu Xia walked into the supermarket without looking back as she watched the body she had kicked out and caught the attention of some zombies. Little did they know that Gu Xia's move led all the zombies from a few kilometers away. Gradually surrounding the supermarket, a small wave of corpses formed.